Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to argue, explain, or fight for attention. It's to step back quietly. When you fade away calmly, you're not punishing him. You're protecting your peace, and the truth is, his ego can't handle the calm it can't control. Calmness has a power that drama can never match. In relationships, especially ones where emotions have been intense or inconsistent, the instinct is often to react loudly, sending messages, confronting, or trying to force understanding. In the moment, it feels like strength because it's visible and immediate. But what it really does is feed into a cycle where your emotional energy is constantly responding to someone else's behavior. Calmness, on the other hand, doesn't feed the cycle. It creates space and sets the tone without relying on spectacle. When you choose calm over chaos, you're signaling something very different. You're showing that your sense of self doesn't depend on being seen, validated, or understood by him. This is deeply threatening to the ego, because ego thrives on attention, on reactions, on chaos that it can manipulate or interpret as importance. When you remain serene, composed, and unprovoked, it disrupts the patterns he has learned to expect. Your calmness is not passive, it's an active choice that communicates control and self-respect. Drama demands engagement, which is why it's so tempting. It feels like you're asserting yourself, making him see your value, or making the situation matter. But drama only exists because you're participating. When you remove yourself from the spectacle, the dynamic changes instantly. You're no longer a participant in the emotional tug-of-war, you've stepped out of it, and that withdrawal is where true power lies. Calmness doesn't need to be justified, and it doesn't need a response. It simply is, and that certainty communicates more than words ever could. One of the key aspects of calmness is that it demonstrates self-mastery. Reacting emotionally gives someone else influence over your state. They may not even be aware of it, but each outburst, argument, or tear allows them to steer the interaction. Calmness, however, reclaims your autonomy. By staying composed, you decide when and if you'll engage, rather than allowing their behavior to dictate your emotional life. That choice is subtle, but it's deeply disarming. The ego cannot negotiate with composure. It expects chaos, not poise. Calmness also reframes the narrative without you needing to explain yourself. In moments of drama, explanations are demanded, emotions are dissected, and intentions are questioned. Calmness communicates a different story, that you are steady, aligned, and not dependent on anyone else's approval to validate your choices. That message is far more powerful than a long monologue or an angry confrontation. It doesn't plead, argue, or cajole. It simply conveys that you are centered and whole on your own. This approach takes patience and self-awareness. In the beginning, it can feel frustrating to remain calm when you want to react. There's a temptation to justify your absence, to argue your feelings, or to demand acknowledgement. But each time you resist that impulse, you reinforce the boundary you've set and strengthen your internal sense of worth. Calmness isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about choosing how and where to express them. It's emotional intelligence in action, and it naturally shifts the power dynamic. Finally, calmness creates a subtle form of influence that drama cannot replicate. While drama can temporarily capture attention, it often backfires by making you seem reactive or desperate. Calmness, however, commands respect because it communicates that your peace is non-negotiable. By removing the theatrics and staying centered, you allow the other person to reflect, to feel the void, and to consider the impact of their behavior without you having to point it out. That quiet, steady presence or absence is magnetic in its own right. The absence of words can often speak more than any conversation ever could. When you're used to someone always being available emotionally, mentally or physically. Your presence becomes something they take for granted. They assume that, no matter what happens, you'll be there to explain, defend, or reassure. This creates a kind of emotional autopilot, where your value is acknowledged less through reflection and more through repetition. By stepping back and withdrawing that constant presence, you force a pause in the dynamic that cannot be ignored. Absence works because it introduces a gap where once there was certainty. Human psychology is wired to notice what is missing more acutely than what is abundant. When your attention, energy, or availability is removed, it creates a space that invites questions. Why is she quieter? Why isn't she reaching out? Why isn't she reacting like before? These questions often arrive without any prompting from you. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back the reality that your presence was meaningful and that it is no longer guaranteed. This is particularly powerful because reflection is almost always self-generated. Words, explanations, and arguments can be dismissed, misinterpreted, or ignored. When you are absent, there is no narrative to challenge. No matter how someone spins a situation, they are confronted with the simple truth. The energy they relied on is gone. That confrontation cannot be manipulated or rationalized away. It exists quietly, firmly, and persistently, forcing a level of introspection that is difficult to achieve otherwise. The ego, especially, struggles with absence because it thrives on accessibility. When someone knows they can provoke, engage, or elicit a reaction at any moment, it validates their importance. Emotional responses, anger, worry, guilt, or even affection, feed that ego continuously. By fading away, you remove that fuel. Without your reactions, there is nothing to feed the cycle. Your absence communicates boundaries, and boundaries are inherently disruptive to an ego accustomed to constant access. Reflection also allows for clarity on both sides. While they are processing your absence, you are no longer consumed by the need to justify yourself or interpret their behavior in real time. You regain the ability to observe the relationship objectively. This quiet space fosters insight. You begin to see patterns of behavior you previously overlooked, recognize where energy was misallocated, and appreciate your own needs without distraction. Absence is as much about your personal growth as it is about their realization. The timing of this reflection is unpredictable, and that's part of its power. Unlike an argument, which demands immediate engagement, absence forces patience. It cannot be rushed, explained, or coerced. The person on the receiving end must process it on their own terms, which often leads to deeper understanding. They are left with the responsibility to reconcile the void, which can trigger genuine self-reflection rather than surface-level reactions designed to soothe tension. Importantly, absence is not a weapon, it is a choice. It is not intended to punish or manipulate, but to protect your energy and reclaim autonomy. When you withdraw calmly, you assert that your worth is not contingent on constant validation or approval. You prioritize your emotional well-being, demonstrating that peace is non-negotiable. This subtle power shift is far more effective than confrontation because it cannot be resisted or argued against. It simply exists. Over time, absence creates a quiet transformation. The lack of immediate engagement forces both parties to reckon with what has been taken for granted. The other person may come to recognize the importance of what they lost, but even if they do not, the real impact is internal. You no longer center your emotional state around someone else's behavior. Your absence becomes a declaration of self-respect, a silent yet undeniable statement of your value, and a catalyst for both personal clarity and potential reflection in the other person. Words can often feel like the most direct way to communicate value, set boundaries, or create understanding in a relationship. We assume that if we just explain ourselves clearly enough, the other person will see our perspective, understand our emotions, or finally recognize our worth. But in reality, words have limitations. When someone has been emotionally inconsistent, inattentive, or dismissive, explanations often fall on deaf ears. You can speak your truth perfectly, but if the listener isn't ready or willing to reflect, your words may be acknowledged superficially, ignored, or rationalized away. Over time, repeated attempts to explain yourself can feel exhausting and ineffective. Absence works differently because it doesn't ask for validation or comprehension. When you fade away, you remove yourself from the predictable patterns of engagement. Your presence is no longer automatic, and the dynamic that once relied on your constant availability is disrupted. This absence introduces a gap, a void that demands attention precisely because it is unfilled. It is in this space that reflection can naturally occur without pressure, argument, or defensiveness. The person is forced to notice what is no longer there, and often, that absence communicates more than words ever could. Reflection in this context is not immediate. At first, your quiet withdrawal may be met with confusion, irritation, or attempts to regain control. These reactions are part of the process. The ego struggles with uncertainty, and your absence creates exactly that uncertainty. Over time, as the pattern of disengagement continues, reflection deepens. He may begin to consider what he took for granted, what he lost, and how your presence contributed to his life. Unlike direct confrontation, which can trigger defensiveness or rationalization, absence allows insight to emerge internally on his own terms. This kind of self-generated reflection tends to be more powerful and lasting than any argument or explanation. The subtlety of absence is what makes it so effective. You don't need to create drama, issue ultimatums, or demand acknowledgement. You simply stop participating in the cycle of emotional labor that previously tied you to him. By removing your energy from the equation, you demonstrate that your value is not dependent on external validation. This quiet strength is magnetic because it shows that you are self-contained, centered, and aligned with your own sense of worth. The absence itself becomes a statement, a reflection of boundaries and self-respect. At the same time, fading away gives you clarity and freedom. When you are no longer caught up in explaining yourself or managing the other person's reactions, you regain space to observe objectively. You can see patterns of behavior you may have ignored, recognize how much energy you devoted to someone who did not reciprocate, and reconnect with your own needs and priorities. This space is crucial because it allows you to approach the situation from a position of strength, not desperation. Reflection, in this sense, is as much for you as it is for him. Importantly, absence is a choice made from self-respect rather than manipulation. It is not about punishing or testing the other person, but about honoring your own peace and emotional stability. When you step back calmly, you assert that your time, energy, and presence are valuable. You demonstrate that they are not to be taken for granted. The impact of this choice can be profound. It shifts the dynamic without a word, allows for genuine reflection, and reinforces the boundaries that you have established. Over time, the power of absence becomes undeniable. It creates a pause in the relationship that allows both parties to assess the reality of the situation. For him, it can spark recognition, curiosity, or even regret. For you, it fosters independence, clarity, and emotional freedom. In stepping back, you communicate your value more effectively than any argument or plea ever could, and you create a space where understanding and self-awareness are more likely to emerge naturally. The void left by your absence is the loudest message of all, one that resonates far beyond anything you could say. Calm disappearance is often mistaken for indifference, but in reality, it is a deliberate act of self-respect and emotional intelligence. It is not about pretending you don't care or playing games to provoke a reaction. Rather, it is about recognizing that your peace and well-being are far more important than proving a point or being understood. When you step back quietly, you are choosing to honor yourself rather than continue to expend energy in a dynamic that may have been draining, inconsistent, or disrespectful. This distinction is subtle but vital. Calm disappearance is about alignment with your own values, not punishment. The power of calm disappearance lies in its restraint. Drama seeks attention. It relies on reactions, messages, or confrontations to feel alive. When you resist that temptation, you are demonstrating a strength that is not visible at first glance but is deeply felt. By choosing to disengage calmly, you signal that your emotional state is not dictated by someone else's behavior. This quiet assertion of agency is far more impactful than any argument or emotional display could ever be. It shows that you are in control of your own energy and that your peace is non-negotiable. One of the most transformative aspects of calm disappearance is that it communicates without words. You do not have to explain your boundaries, defend your choices, or justify your emotions. Your absence alone sends a clear message. You are no longer available for behaviors or patterns that do not serve you. This is incredibly difficult for an ego to process because it is accustomed to access and predictability. When the expected dynamic changes, the void you leave creates discomfort, curiosity, and reflection. It forces the other person to reckon with the reality that your presence was not guaranteed and that your energy was always a choice. Calm disappearance is also a form of self-empowerment because it prioritizes your growth over external validation. Many people stay trapped in cycles of frustration or disappointment because they hope their absence, words, or reactions will finally be acknowledged or appreciated. By stepping back without drama, you reclaim your power from that dependency. You are no longer seeking approval, acknowledgement, or understanding from someone who may be incapable of providing it. Your focus shifts from them to yourself, and that internal alignment creates a magnetic, unshakable sense of confidence. This approach requires patience and discipline. It can be tempting to reach out one last time, to explain your feelings, or to seek a response that validates your worth. But each time you resist that urge, you reinforce your boundaries and strengthen your emotional autonomy. Calm disappearance is not about suppressing your emotions. It is about channeling them wisely. It is about making deliberate choices that preserve your energy and maintain your dignity. Over time, this restraint communicates far more than words ever could. The ultimate impact of calm disappearance is both internal and external. Internally, you cultivate emotional stability, self-awareness, and clarity about your needs and values. Externally, the other person is confronted with the reality of your absence, often prompting reflection and, in some cases, realization. The ego struggles with a void it cannot control, and while you cannot dictate their response, the act of stepping back quietly inherently shifts the power dynamic. This is the essence of emotional maturity, prioritizing your peace, asserting your value, and allowing the consequences to unfold naturally without forcing them. In the end, calm disappearance is a testament to your strength, intelligence, and self-worth. It is not about winning or proving a point. It is about reclaiming your life from patterns that no longer serve you. By stepping back with intention, you communicate boundaries, maintain dignity, and create space for clarity, growth, and reflection for both yourself and the other person. The quiet power of your absence speaks volumes, and it cannot be ignored. Emotional reactions are often instinctive because they feel like a direct response to what someone else is doing. When we feel hurt, dismissed, or disrespected, the impulse is to respond immediately through messages, calls, confrontations, or explanations. In the moment, reacting can feel like strength because it is visible and tangible, but over time, these reactions subtly give control over your emotional state to the other person. Your moods, your thoughts, and even your sense of self begin to rise and fall based on how they behave, what they say, or how they respond. When you constantly react, you are essentially handing over the keys to your own emotional world. Each angry message, each plea for understanding, and each attempt to justify your worth becomes a lever for them to manipulate, often unconsciously. They learn how to provoke you, how to predict your responses, and how to maintain control over the dynamic without having to change themselves. Even if your reactions feel justified, they still keep you tethered to someone else's behavior, which is not empowerment, it is dependence in disguise. Calm distance, on the other hand, shifts this dynamic entirely. When you stop reacting, you remove the immediate feedback loop that feeds the pattern of behavior. There is no instant validation for their ego, no emotional spike to latch onto, no predictable outcome to manipulate. This pause allows you to reclaim control over your own emotions, decisions, and energy. Instead of responding to chaos, you respond to clarity. Your choices become deliberate rather than reactive, and your sense of agency grows stronger with every moment of restraint. Control shifts quietly and powerfully when you stop reacting. You are no longer negotiating your emotional state through argument or explanation. You are simply choosing what to engage with and when. This form of control is subtle but deeply effective because it does not rely on intimidation, manipulation, or drama. It is rooted in self-mastery, and it communicates strength without the need for words. Calm distance demonstrates that you are anchored, not because of fear, but because of a deliberate alignment with your own values and peace. Predictability is what makes emotional reactions so vulnerable to manipulation. When someone knows exactly how you will respond, they gain the power to influence your feelings without even trying. Calm distance disrupts that pattern. By refusing to react, you introduce unpredictability into the dynamic. There is no lever to pull, no trigger to exploit, and no guaranteed outcome. The other person is left with uncertainty, and the ego does not handle uncertainty well. This creates a subtle shift in power, where they must confront their own behavior rather than manipulate yours. It is important to note that calm distance is not about manipulation or trying to provoke a response. That would simply replace one form of reaction with another. True calm distance comes from acceptance. You accept that you cannot control how someone behaves, but you can control how you respond, what access they have to your energy, and how you allow yourself to be treated. This acceptance removes emotional charge from the situation and replaces it with clarity and composure. As you stop reacting, you also reclaim energy. The time and attention previously spent analyzing messages, rereading interactions, or replaying conversations are freed up. You are no longer emotionally tethered to their unpredictability. Instead, your focus returns to yourself, your growth, and your peace. This freedom is the essence of power, quiet, steady, and self-contained. Ultimately, reclaiming control through calm distance is about reclaiming your life from dependence on someone else's behavior. It is about choosing peace over reaction, alignment over chaos, and agency over emotional turbulence. Calm distance doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention, and it doesn't need validation. It simply exists, rooted in self-respect and emotional mastery, and that quiet strength shifts the entire dynamic without a single word being spoken. It's natural to think that the ultimate goal of fading away or stepping back is to make him regret losing you. After all, we often tie our sense of validation to recognition and acknowledgement. We imagine the moment he finally notices your absence, feels the weight of what he took for granted, and comes back with remorse. That fantasy can feel satisfying, but relying on someone else's regret as proof of your worth keeps you emotionally connected to the very dynamic you're trying to leave behind. True empowerment, however, begins the moment your focus shifts inward, away from his reactions and toward your own sense of self. Emotional freedom emerges when you no longer measure your value by whether someone else notices or regrets your absence. As long as you are hoping for acknowledgement, you remain tethered to the other person's behavior. Every text, every silence, and every delayed response becomes a point of emotional engagement that you cannot fully control. Freedom comes when his reactions or lack thereof become irrelevant to your peace. When you stop waiting for him to validate you, you reclaim your emotional agency completely. Your well-being no longer depends on outcomes outside your control, and that is the essence of power. Stepping back quietly creates the conditions for internal clarity. Without constant engagement, the emotional noise begins to settle. You are no longer reacting to every slight, every ambiguous message, or every inconsistency. In this quiet, your nervous system recalibrates, your thoughts organize, and your perspective sharpens. You begin to see patterns for what they truly are, rather than how you hoped they would be. This clarity allows you to assess the relationship and your own choices without the distortion of immediate emotion. As you focus on yourself, a subtle but profound shift occurs. You start making decisions from a place of alignment rather than reaction. How you spend your time, the people you engage with, and the energy you invest are now dictated by your standards, not by attempts to elicit recognition or remorse from him. Your life expands as you redirect your energy toward growth, self-care, and experiences that truly matter. This is the real payoff of stepping back, your freedom, not his regret. Interestingly, the absence itself often triggers the reflection and questions you once sought to elicit through words or confrontation. Yet, any potential regret he feels is secondary. It is a side effect of your choice, not the purpose. The real transformation is internal. You are no longer reliant on external validation to feel whole or powerful. Your value is inherent and your peace is self-generated. That is the kind of empowerment no one can take away. This approach also changes how you engage with future connections. Once you've experienced the freedom of detachment and the clarity it brings, you become more selective, more aligned, and less willing to tolerate ambiguity or inconsistency. You recognize patterns that do not serve you and set boundaries that protect your emotional well-being. Emotional freedom, once tasted, becomes a standard rather than a luxury. Ultimately, the true victory of fading away calmly is not in watching him realize what he lost. It is in reclaiming your own life. It is in stepping out of cycles of reaction, letting go of the need for external validation, and cultivating a state of selfish awareness that is independent of anyone else. His ego collapsing may happen, but it is incidental. What matters is that you have chosen yourself, your peace, and your clarity. In that quiet reclaiming, you find something far more satisfying and enduring than any regret could ever provide: freedom, autonomy, and unwavering self-worth. Fading away calmly isn't about making him regret it. It's about reclaiming yourself. Your peace, your clarity, and your worth are far more powerful than any reaction you could ever provoke. Step back, stay centered, and let your absence do the talking while you live fully in your own freedom.